Rumination is a thinking process that can be found in a lot of common mental health problems. So things like depression, OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder, all often have a component of ruminative thinking. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about what rumination is, and I'm going to take you through a couple of little steps which you can start to practice and incorporate into your life to allow you to just notice when you are engaged in a pattern of rumination and then to free you up to do something about it. So, step one in terms of understanding rumination and getting to grips with rumination is to understand exactly what it is. So, rumination is a cyclical thinking process that is often focused on the past. It's often focused on lots of questions and looking at why we feel this way. Why do I always have difficulties like these? What is it that's wrong with me? Why can I never feel any better and things like that? And the problem with this repetitive thinking process is that it is often, because it is asking these kind of why questions, it can become quite endless, really. We find ourselves, rather than being in the present moment, and actually taking action to deal with whatever kind of challenges are there in front of us, we're often more in our head. And we're just kind of recycling and asking ourselves a lot of these why questions to see if we can get some form of answer. But because the why questions can be indefinite and they can go on forever, there's loads of different reasons as to why we might feel a certain way or why certain situations might turn out the way that they do. It becomes repetitive, and we just do it a lot of the time. And one of the downsides to it, there's two downsides basically. One is that we're simply not in contact with the present moment, which means that actually there may be better solutions, better remedies to our challenges, which we can actually incorporate by bringing our attention into that present moment. And the other effect is because we're kind of revisiting all the different things there which might contribute to why we feel a certain way today, we're kind of digging up the past. Yeah. And there might be things there that actually stop us from feeling good about ourselves today and contribute to maintenance of either the low mood or the ruminative OCD or PTSD. So the first thing we want to consider, once we've got that definition of what rumination is, we want to just start to notice when we are doing it. And in cognitive behavior therapy, one of the things that we use commonly is we will use, say, a rumination diary. And we use diaries in CBT not because we like to get people to fill out lots of pieces of paper or anything like that. It's simply to make these unconscious processes a little bit more conscious. And some of the evidence around rumination is that people actually aren't always aware that they are engaged in ruminative thinking. People will often find that they just kind of automatically do it. They might wake up in the morning, notice that they're not necessarily feeling full of the joys of spring, and then they just get caught up in this ruminative thinking process. And it can happen in lots of different contexts as well. So it could be challenges at work, challenges in our relationship, or whatever. And the strategy, the automatic habit of thought that we find ourselves caught up in is this rumination. Lots and lots of these why questions. So by using a diary of the type we use in cognitive behavior therapy, we are able to then just kind of say, okay, do you know what? I noticed I was feeling this way. And actually, I noticed that my mind wasn't about, dealing with this current issue that's there in front of me, dealing with, preparing, an evening meal for the family or, engaging in something that I enjoy at the gym or a hobby or whatever. Actually, my mind was focusing on what happened in work yesterday or focusing on why I can't succeed in relationships or why I feel such a failure. So first step is actually catching that. We've got our definition, we know what rumination is, and then we just develop awareness of the fact that we are engaged in it. The second step that I teach people to do is we start to kind of get a little bit of leverage on the pattern of rumination. And Cognitive behavior therapy, there's lots of different schools of thought in cognitive behavior therapy. We've got what we call more cognitive approaches, in which case we will be interested in understanding what we call metacognitive beliefs about what rumination actually does for us. So we might have a metacognitive belief there that if I ruminate on a problem, then that might lead to some form of resolution for me. And I believe, whereas there might be an element of truth, there might be an aspect where a little bit of rumination might lead to some form of problem resolution. That belief might also be unhelpful for us because it just kind of becomes the only thing that we ever do. We've got this rumination, and we kind of need to challenge the metacognitive beliefs around what we believe rumination might do for us. We also have kind of negative metacognitive beliefs around things like rumination, such as my rumination is beyond my control. Right? And actually, we can challenge that as well. We can say, okay, well, we've got this belief rumination is out of my control. So let's see if we can do a little experiment where, on day one, you can ruminate as much as you like. Yeah, you can ruminate all day long. But on day two, we're going to set aside a small amount of time that day, say an hour that day, where, you're going to give yourself permission to do lots and lots of rumination, to do as much rumination as you want. But the rest of the time, we're just going to leave free. We're just going to focus our attention on here. And often when people start to do experiments like this, they start to notice there that actually they are able to kind of get a little bit more control over that process of rumination. So that's an example of how we would use more cognitive approaches in terms of getting to grips on rumination itself, getting that little bit of leverage. In a behavioural perspective, we look at rumination again as a behaviour, but we look at how that behaviour is used in a certain type of context. What that means for us is that there will be a certain trigger. Let's use an example. My boss tells me off at work, and I then engage in this pattern of rumination. Why can't I do my job right? Why does my boss not like me? Why can't I, just get by in life? Why do I fail to impress people? Why can't I succeed in relationships with work? So we've got our trigger. We then engage in this behavior of rumination. And then we assess, okay, well, what's the consequence of that? There will be, at some level, a desired consequence, a function that we are hoping to achieve through rumination. We are looking there to ruminate because we are seeking some form of resolution. But then there will also be unintended consequences. So rumination, say at 4 o'clock in the morning, where I'm still overthinking what my boss said to me and why I can't succeed at work, has this negative consequence of actually maintaining my distress, impacting my sleep, things like that. So we do this process which we call functional analysis, just to kind of say, okay, what's the function of this behavior of rumination in this context? Is it doing what we want it to do? Is this pattern of overthinking the past really giving us what we want from life? So in a cognitive behavioural framework, in our repertoire, depending upon what feels most appropriate for us and what kind of treatment model we're using, we would use either metacognitive processes and behavioural experiments as a way of catching rumination, manipulating rumination, and modifying some of the beliefs about what rumination does for us. And then in a more behavioural vein, we would say, okay, what's the function of this behaviour in this context? Is it doing what we desire it to do, or does it have unhelpful negative consequences for us in terms of managing life? So getting leverage is step two in how we deal with rumination. The third step is when we decide there that actually this rumination is not serving us in the way that we want it to, we then do the attentional work and the quite purposeful work of making a decision to do less of it. So we might have diarised the certain situations in which we are likely to use rumination. We might have either a functional analysis worksheet or a metacognitive kind of diary there looking at, the situations and factors that contribute to our rumination. And then we just want to say, okay, you know what? I noticed that I'm doing it. I noticed that it doesn't work for me. So actually at this moment, I'm going to take my mind out of here, or take my attention focus out of here and refocus it on what is actually going on there in front of me. And there's lots of little techniques we can use to improve attentional focus to stop us from getting caught up in our mind's eye. So in that metacognitive school of cognitive behavior therapy, attention training, deliberate attention training is one intervention that we might use, in which we are deliberately kind of paying attention purposefully to different aspects of our experience. And it's almost like we're just training ourselves to do that as and when. The background to this is because, again, some of the research suggests that when we are caught up in depression or other kind of mental health problems, there can be those kind of attentional deficits simply because, we're not actually paying attention to what's going on in front of us. We need to strengthen that ability to reattend to the things that are actually kind of manageable, workable, might make us feel a little bit better, and away from that ruminative process. In more behavioural schools of cognitive behaviour therapy, we can use different techniques. If borrowing something from the acceptance and commitment therapy literature, we've got a technique which we call drop and anchor, in which case we say, okay, we know that this kind of ruminative process is going on right now, but we are going to purposefully bring our attention in a very structured way into this present moment, just as things are right now. So dropping anchor is a technique that we use in which we say, okay, we're going to drop anchor into this present moment, not into the future, not into the past where rumination is focused, but we're just going to notice, say, for instance, the sensation of our feet on the floor, the sensation of our body in contact with the furniture, our clothes, the temperature of the room. We might bring our attention into what's going on in the body right now, our breathing. We might also kind of bring our attention up into the mind itself and almost in a kind of passive way, not engaging in rumination, but just observe it. So we're just kind of not feeding it, we're not giving it more energy, we're just watching it from that place of almost like a pure consciousness. So they are some of the main things there that I encourage my clients to do when we are seeking to get a grip with rumination. And what I would suggest for anybody who struggles with rumination, no matter what kind of common mental health problem it is that they are dealing with, is to start practicing noticing and recognizing that we are simply doing that. We've got that name for it, we know what it is, we're literally chewing over old stuff. Is that serving me today? And if it isn't, which it likely is not, you say, okay, let's bring it right into this present moment. We are making that decision just to reconnect with what is there in front of us. And that is the way to kind of free us up from engaging in a pattern of rumination. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you have found it helpful. Please feel free to check out some of my other videos on YouTube. Subscribe if you find things helpful. And you can also go to my website, www.accesscbt.co.uk, if you want to find out more about cognitive behaviour therapy, EMDR, and positive psychology. I look forward to speaking to you either in the comments or directly through the website. Thanks a lot. Bye now.